And so we live in this very weird space when it comes to the economy, that politicians are able to disseminate falsehoods far more easily than people who know better can disseminate the truth.
And from the political science side of the street, right, you look at people, your fellow citizens, and most political scientists want them to be more engaged. Me, I don't. I think people should live the way they want, and just the very nature of what I said indicates that, okay, the central problem here might be that people who are free to do what they want to do don't want to do what you want them to do. And therein lies the difficulty, right? Most people would rather mow their lawn and wash their car and go bowling and go to the movies than to sit down and dissect various political leanings. They just don't care. And I can't blame them. I mean, I don't care either, and it's my job to care.
And notice something interesting here. And I'm with James. I don't blame people because it's not their job to care about these things. They've got more important things to be thinking about. And when we lived in a world like we had at the founding, where the understanding was government existed to protect property rights, to defend your borders, and that's basically it. The concept that we have today of positive rights, if I have a right to healthcare, a right to housing.
Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76, my original channel. First of all, please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel if you want to donate something to the channel. That information is below in the description box, and you can also leave a super thanks if you see fit. Also, please consider joining the Big Words LLC Newsletter. In addition to being a YouTube content creator, I am also a writer, and I am an aspiring author and a blogger. The link to my book project, The Engineers, A Western New York Basketball Story, is also in the description box below. Everyone, this offering is part one of a recent interview I conducted with Antony Davies and James R. Harrigan, the authors of Cooperation and Coercion, How Busybodies Became Busy Bullies, and What That Means for Economics and Politics. I read a passage from Cooperation and Coercion a little while ago, and I may read others in the future, but Antony and James were gracious enough to do a sit-down interview with me virtually to talk about the book and to talk about other economic and political concepts. Our discussion lasted roughly 90 minutes, and so I have split this into 3 parts, which you are about to watch is the first part of our discussion. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn something, and I hope I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed participating in this discussion and hosting this discussion with James and Antony, and hopefully we can do it again. So I'm going to cut right to the ending, my ending slide after this first part. So once again, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Today, I have 2 very, very special guests. I read a passage from their book of Cooperation and Coercion, I think about a month ago. And I think it's a fascinating book. I'm subscribed to their podcast. And they were gracious enough to agree to do a Q&A with me. So I want to welcome Antony Davies and James R. Harrigan, the authors of cooperation and coercion, how busybodies became busy bullies, and what that means for economics and politics. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, let's dive right in. Let's make the most efficient use of the time. I sent you all questions. We'll start with question number one. Anthony and James, welcome to my channel. This discussion will be the first of its kind here on my platform. I first became aware of you, Anthony, when one of my mentors sent me the link of your discussion on, the link to your discussion on equality of opportunity versus equality of outcomes. James, I first became familiar with you by subscribing to Words and Numbers. For those unfamiliar with you, talk about your backgrounds in as much detail as you see fit, and how did you guys team up?
Well, I'm Antony Davies. I'm associate professor of economics at Duquesne University. Spent some time in the private sector in the tech world, and I go back and forth between academia and the business world because I've got the entrepreneurial bug. You just can't shake it. It's like an itch. Every 7 years, I have to go out and start a company. One of my forays out into the world, I ran across this guy, James Harrigan, and he says, we instantly liked each other. And he said, hey, we should do something together. And I said, absolutely. And so we decided we would do something together, even though we had no idea what that was going to be. But over the decade we've known each other, that's turned into Words and Numbers, our podcast, Cooperation and Coercion, which is our book. And I guess we do other things too. We go around to high schools around the country. We just started some TikTok videos that I think are cool and James thinks are horrible. So he's not going to admit that he's actually a part of that.
I'm not part of that, but I am part of the larger agreement, whatever that ended up being over the years. I refer to my relationship with Anthony as kind of a bad marriage. We're together because we kind of have to be at this point. We've got to look after the children, so we deal with each other because of that. But I think Anthony and I are kind of similar, not by training, though. I'm a trained political philosopher, Plato to Nietzsche, that's my thing. So it's a little odd that he and I would team up, but that's how we got Words and Numbers. I'm words, and the econometrician is numbers. I've been a professor for quite some time in and around the United States. And then I went to Iraq, where I became the dean of the American University for a time, came back and got involved with executive management and nonprofits, did that at 2 or 3 places, and ended up right now at the American Institute for Economic Research, where I am the senior editor.
Okay. So you two just met during the course of business and said, hey, let's team up, and we collectively...
Yeah, well, actually what it was, I was giving a weekend seminar to a bunch of students, and I needed a political philosopher because my political philosopher, like 3 days out, said he can't make it all of a sudden. So I called up some people I knew. I said, look, I need somebody. And they said, you know James Harrigan? I said, I don't know James Harrigan. He's up the street, like literally 7 miles from where I live, teaching at my alma mater of all coincidences. So that's how we met. It was pure serendipity.
Okay. Yeah, and it's been every day since. Typically I wake up and my first conversation is with Anthony. My wife doesn't exactly understand this, but I guess she doesn't mind, because here we are.
Okay, so let's talk about your Words and Numbers podcast. How did the two of you come up with the idea, and what's it designed to do?
Oh, I got this one in. Anthony said in one of his less endearing moments, what we need to do is present all of our op-eds as video online. And I said, nope, that's a terrible idea. And long story short, we agreed that a third party would intercede, watch what we did, and decide if it was going to be any good or not. And I thought, great, anybody will look at this and know it's not going to be any good. And so we made the first episode. We sent it off like a pilot to the guy who was going to get a look at it, and he looked at it and he got in touch with us and he said, "Boy, that was terrible." And I thought, "Yes, please, more from you." And then he said, "But I'm moving to a place where I have to take a job where I have to get content put together." And lo and behold, he didn't have any content. He said, "How about you guys keep working this way, and then we'll make a podcast out of it, and we'll just go from there." And thus Words and Numbers was born. It was like most things in my life, an accident, right? It turned out to be this wonderful thing that started inauspiciously, to say the least. And it's that thing in our lives. I think, Ant, you would probably agree with this. It absolutely changed my life. Yep. Every direction that I was going in absolutely shut down, and this one gigantic avenue opened up right in front of me.
Yeah.
And you have that same feeling, I think?
Oh, absolutely. My life took a completely different turn after meeting you.
Yeah. And Words and Numbers just turned out to be such a defining thing.
Yeah, and it's something that I think I had higher hopes for it than you did, but it ended up being something even far beyond what I anticipated.
Yeah, far beyond. We're academics. We work in that space, and we write a journal article. We're lucky if 8 people read it. We have over 1 million downloads. 1 million. I can't even get my head around what that means.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question. So before we discuss cooperation and coercion, everyone, I do have my copy here. It's marked up and it's got the little pink stickies in it. Antony, I want to discuss something you said that really resonated with me. And that was that the average American doesn't have the time. I'll add in the curiosity or the will to study the concepts that you and James talk about. Ultimately, this leads to being uninformed and doing things like voting strictly off of feelings and misinformation. I've been guilty of getting caught up in the emotion of the political machine myself in the past. Can you say a few words about that? Is this something you observed in your students, your social circles, just looking at social media? Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, I see it all over the place, and it's not specific to ages. You would think that it's a thing that's amongst young people. That's amongst young people, it's amongst old people. It's across the board. And the thing is this: that on the one hand, economics, or I should say, the economy, is a complex thing that you have to really think about carefully if you want to understand things like the impact of a minimum wage, or just today, the loan forgiveness that President Biden signed. And on the other hand, it's very easy to lie about the economy. If I'm a politician, I can get out there and say, "Hey, elect me and I'll forgive your student loans." And everybody cheers and they think that's a great thing. It's going to be wonderful. But it's not until you think about the ramifications of that you realize that actually that's not necessarily a good idea at all. It's certainly not as magnanimous as politicians would have you believe. And so we live in this very weird space when it comes to the economy, that politicians are able to disseminate falsehoods far more easily than people who know better can disseminate the truth.
And from the political science side of the street, right, you look at people, your fellow citizens, and most political scientists want them to be more engaged. Me, I don't. I think people should live the way they want, and just the very nature of what I said indicates that, okay, the central problem here might be that people who are free to do what they want to do don't want to do what you want them to do. And therein lies the difficulty, right? Most people would rather mow their lawn and wash their car and go bowling and go to the movies than to sit down and dissect various political leanings. They just don't care. And I can't blame them. I mean, I don't care either, and it's my job to care.
And notice something interesting here. I'm with James. I don't blame people because it's not their job to care about these things. They've got more important things to be thinking about. And when we lived in a world like we had at the founding, where the understanding was government existed to protect property rights, to defend your borders, and that's basically it. The concept that we have today of positive rights, if I have a right to healthcare or a right to housing or right to food or whatever it is, that's completely foreign to the founders. And here's the thing. If you live under a government that the founders had in mind, one exclusively based on negative rights, it doesn't matter if your neighbors aren't paying attention to what's going on, because the government's not intruding on your lives. It's when we get to where we are today that all of a sudden everything's a positive right, that the guy down the street can vote for free healthcare thinking it's a good thing, and that impacts me negatively. Because A, it's a bad thing, and B, because of the positive rights regime, he now has the ability to encourage the government to take money out of my pocket to give to him for whatever he wants.
And just backing up for a second, and negative rights are the kinds of rights that the American founding pointed towards, right? And it's very simple. When you look at negative rights, what are we talking about? Well, generally speaking, everything in the First and Second Amendments. We could just use those as quick examples. The right to keep and bear arms, does that cost your fellow citizens anything monetarily? And no. How about the right to the free exercise of religion? Does that cost your fellow citizens anything? And no, of course not. And every single negative right is like this. There is no bill to pay for them. The government is charged with not doing things instead of doing things. Now, when we get to the positive rights regime, that's exactly how it works, right? The government must act. So previously, the government could not act, and now the government must act. And we get this sea change from about 1909 forward, when the progressive movement kind of hit home in the United States. And before you know it, we have all these laws and rights, and they intersect and they conflict all over the place, and they're incredibly expensive. So, you know, your right to a retirement through Social Security, things like this, right? What we euphemistically call Obamacare. These are very expensive things, and the way they work is we take all of the money that covers these things from one group, and then we dole it out to another group. And that's the positive rights regime in a nutshell. So we've got these two massive, we've got these two different kinds of rights. And we probably should never have called positive rights rights in the first place, because it confounds the matter. They're not the same kinds of rights as you find in the founding. And this is the confusing place where we find ourselves. And, you know, frankly, I understand why people tune right out of this. They have children to raise. They have jobs to do, right? They don't want to deal with this all day, every day. And I can't say I blame them. I would rather.
Yeah, but on the other hand, what happens here is you get decade after decade of this conception of positive rights and the ability for people to encourage the government to take money from one group and give it to another. And a lot of these things sound good and they sound right, that people should have health care, people should have food. And my complaint isn't against that. My complaint is against the fact that once you open that door to the government actively doing things, you end up where we are now with $30 trillion in debt, a Social Security Administration that itself projects will be bankrupt in the next 13 years.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say to the viewers, the concepts of positive and negative rights, that's covered in Cooperation and Coercion. And going back to what I think, Antony, you said it, that people don't want to think about these things. They're raising their children. They're involved in extracurricular activities. I'm certainly guilty of that. But I'm going to ask, I'll call it a rhetorical question. You know, and this is for the viewers as well. What's more important? I mean, is it not crucial to know how your country works? Is it not crucial to be able to ask questions about what the government is doing and what the politicians are proposing? I know that I'm sure you guys have heard this concept that people should have to take a test in order to qualify for their voting right. I know that offends some people, but it's such a powerful thing. Your vote. I think that people should know what they're voting on, and instead, a lot of times it's feelings and emotions that are triggered and influenced by the media class. And I'm going to say one other thing. I'm an African American. I'm from the east side of Buffalo. My folks might not let me say in this, but for the most part, the way I grew up was from the perspective of Democrat good, Republican bad.
Mm.
And,
Yeah, well, look,
and it wasn't until I moved out and started my schooling and started meeting people from other communities and other walks of life that I started to question that and think that, you know what, maybe that's not necessarily true. Maybe it's not a black and white thing. Maybe there's gray in there. Maybe there's a little bit of everything. But what were we going to say, James?
well, look, that's just unwinding now, right? We're only now seeing blacks going to the Republican Party in anything approaching numbers. All of a sudden, they're a player in Republican politics. They haven't been for well over 100 years, since Reconstruction. But this is something that came up a lot when Ant and I first started working together, right? And Ant's a trained economist, which gives him a different skill set, right? He's got a different toolbox than I've got. And he would say things like you just did, right? Well, that we want people to vote, but maybe they should be better informed. And how about a test? And my backbone would go straight up, because anything that gets us back to slavery in the Jim Crow South is going to be really, really difficult in the end. And the voting, the tests for the franchise, that was one way that, especially in the racist South, blacks were kept from the franchise. They would just make these ridiculous tests so difficult that literally no one would pass it. But it was only given to blacks, so no big deal, right? And I'll tell you this, when I was in graduate school working on my PhD, the professor walked in one night and handed out a slip of paper, and it had a bunch of test questions on it. And she said, just answer it, no questions. And it turned out to be one of these tests that blacks were forced to take after the Civil War. And in a room full of doctoral candidates, one person passed it. And isn't that something? And look, you have to admit that some of the things are time bound, right? Some of the answers were no longer the same. So a lot of people failed because of the difference in time. But boy, you would think a room full of PhD candidates in political science would have been all over that, and they just weren't. So whenever we get something that looks or smells like that, it gets a lot of extra attention. And I don't know how to get around the problem of our own terrible history on this.
Okay. Well, I just want to put a disclaimer out there with what I just said. I'm not telling anyone to vote Democrat or Republican. I consider myself to be an independent. I think what I'm getting at is just being more, being well informed and at least understanding some basics of how the government works and how taxation works. And you guys talk about that quite a bit in the book about increasing tax rates versus taxes. Yeah, I think most voting citizens should know about the three branches and how those three branches work, and how long our presidential term is. Those things, basics. There are a lot of people who don't know out there. They're just
well, I think there's an. Go ahead, James.
Well, here's the weirdest part, right? These are the sorts of tests that we give new Americans when people want to immigrate. We say, okay, learn this stuff because it's really important. And that's why in a lot of cases, immigrants are much better Americans than people who were born here.
Mm-hmm.
I would be happy for a test, not for the American voter, but for Congress.
Damn straight.
If you're going to be a
Yes,
congressman and you're
please.
going to vote on a bill, let's demonstrate that you've actually read and understood this thing you're going to be voting on.
Oh, and we could make this so much better and so much easier. I remember I was speaking in front of a room, maybe 200-300 people, and somebody at the end asked, well, should we have some kind of test for potential candidates for office? And I said, absolutely, a reading test. I want them to read the entire Constitution of the United States out loud in front of people. So later, when they do all kinds of stupid crap, we could say, you know, don't you remember that day, that one day that you read a longish document for the rest of us? And I would love to see this. I mean, the power of the words of the Constitution should be sufficient. And yet we know they're not. So if we're going to make anybody read anything, anybody do anything, this is my suggestion.
Okay. I've never heard that one before. I think that's a good idea. All right. Let's move on to the next question. In one of your recent podcasts, and I thought this was very, very fascinating, you two also talked about how depending upon one's political affiliation, they either believe or don't believe the mainstream news. It's fascinating to me because we're in a very polarized environment right now as a nation, as you guys know. Also, the fourth estate shapes public perception and helps dictate how people think, how they feel about themselves, and how they vote. Talk about the fourth estate and why this is dangerous and why it's important for everyone to do their own research.
Well, I think this applies to both the left and the right. There are news outlets that are major outlets that tend to be on the left, and other ones that tend to be on the right, and both of them are equally bad at portraying the truth. In fact, they cease to be news organizations at all. It's almost all opinion masquerading as news, and so it's very hard. James and I had thought about this for a while. Where can you find neutral news? And that's very difficult. In my world, the best solution I've come to is to pick two reasonable news outlets, one on the left and one on the right, and read both of them, understanding that I'm getting alternate slants. But to get the no slant option, I just don't see that happening anymore. And a large part of it, I believe, is due to the fact we have to remember media organizations are profit-driven entities. They're looking to make a buck. And how do they make a buck? They make a buck by getting us excited enough that we buy their newspaper or watch their program, whatever it is. And, what gets us excited? Partisan stuff. When I can say, those guys over there, they're evil. They're going to come for you. Here's what they're going to do. You get all excited and you tune in and watch the news. And I make advertising dollars.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it's almost impossible to find something that's worth your time, right? It's just almost impossible. And what I end up finding myself doing is during Republican administrations, I watch a lot of MSNBC. And during Democratic administrations, I watch a lot of Fox News, right? And I think you can get a sense of what's going on if you look at the opposition research that's being done to the party in power. It's far from perfect. I wish we had honorable news outlets that we could be proud of. We don't. We likely never will. And here's the thing: we likely never really did. So, it's really there were all kinds of god awful things all the way back to the American founding. You had broadsides and pamphlets and things like this. So, partisan news is nothing new. We just think it is. So,
okay.
I throw my hands up and just say to hell with it.
And I think we need to be careful as well when we think about blame. I don't blame the media here. I blame the viewers. The media is a business like any business. It's going to give the customers what they want. And the customers have demonstrated that what they want is this partisan bickering.
That's right. And it's worse than that too, Anthony. What the people want are just these little short bites that never get to the heart of anything. And I say this every time I get the chance, but the most often heard statement on 24-hour news channels is, that's all the time we've got.
Yeah.
they say this after 2.5, 3 minutes. You have a 24-hour news network. It's never going to be the case that that's all the time you've got. You choose that. It's not part of the problem. You make it the problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to throw out two names. One was alive during my lifetime. The other, I think I may have just missed, and he may have just been winding down when I was born. But I hear rumors that someone like Walter Cronkite gave nice objective news analysis, and more recently, I was told that Tim Russert did the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know Tim Russert, and I was young in the days of Cronkite. Young meaning I think he retired when I was in high school. But I can recall, because I was very interested in politics back then, I can recall him being a very kind of grandfatherly, came across as trustworthy type. I wasn't able to distinguish between, truth and falsehood then like I can now. But nonetheless, I have a memory of him being a trustworthy guy.
I think the world of Tim Russert, he's, I think, sorely missed. Cronkite, on the other hand, this is an interesting thing, because Walter Cronkite was the voice of the United States in no small way. And he was a man of the soft left, so not the shrill, bickering left that we have now, but the stately, respectable left that we once had. And he was just a shade or two off neutral.
What we call moderates today.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough with Cronkite. But people only had three choices to get their news back then. So being the best then got you all of the marbles. And isn't that fascinating, right? We don't have anything close to this now. We have scores of outlets kind of body checking each other to get to the front of the line. And, when the fights are bloody, they go real hard. We're never going to have a Walter Cronkite again, except for this. Think about Joe Rogan and what he's been able to accomplish. He's a curious guy, and he's a smart guy. And he admits that he doesn't know everything, but he wants to learn about everything, right? That's what curious people do. And all of a sudden, there are more people watching him every day than the three major outlets combined. And isn't that something? I mean, Anthony and I, we kind of plot and scheme on how we can get on his show. Because that's
right.
that's a career maker for anybody, not unlike what sitting down with somebody like Tim Russert would have been years and years ago. So I'm not so disheartened when I see how it goes. Now, every now and again, Joe Rogan says something that's incredibly stupid. And the next day he pretended like it never happened, and he just moves on. And his audience loves him for it, right? He doesn't have to be right all the time. He has to be curious all the time. And I think that's just fantastic. So I'm a little hopeful.
Okay. All right. After watching your content